we see great benefits. So for example, at Richland Library, we developed this citywide strategy called Library of Studio, where the libraries really were designed with a variety of maker spaces to foster the creative economy in Columbia, South Carolina. And nothing like a headline to prove that we achieved that strategic vision, which is nothing like Richland Library, artists, entrepreneurs find community beyond bookshelves. So in Memphis, in Memphis, Tennessee, we were hired to do, much like y'all's teen space here, a 8,000 square foot renovation in their main library that created an intergenerational teen space that has become so successful that many of this, they've made so many records that they have their own record label. Some of the students who didn't even know that there was a Mississippi River running through their city are now going on exchange programs to Japan. And their work was so innovative that it got them a Smithsonian article, How Memphis Created the Nation's Most Innovative Public Library. Another great project is in New Haven, Connecticut, where the library wanted to create a space in the main library that would foster the innovation economy for folks that are typically not included. So women and people of color are really using this space to advance their opportunities in the knowledge economy. And then one of my favorite projects is in Las Vegas, where we designed an East Las Vegas library that was centered on the Latinx community. And you're seeing a lot of pictures of their opening day. So you see a whole family coming to celebrate. We created a plaza in the front yard where the folks came opening day to show off their cars. And then there is a podcast called Latinos Who Lunch that is a national podcast that's produced in the library. And they have a DJ program. But I also wanted, given y'all's national stature around early childhood education and youth development, I also wanted to show some images of work we've done across the country that really are reinforcing environments to foster play and learning. You can see, after visiting some of the libraries today, I could see some of these types of spaces activating those experiences. So just a few things that we're learning. Y'all are doing amazing programs, and y'all are doing amazing work that the buildings weren't designed to support. So many of the librarians are fighting with their buildings every single day. The San Jose community is rich with cultural diversity and innovation that we want to celebrate and activate and leverage. We will be engaging in a methodology that's research-based, but also is incorporating all of the great strengths and assets that already exist in the community. And we will be engaging in an ambitious community engagement effort that will seek inputs from a variety of folks, from community partners to community members, with exciting and engaging community events. And what it will result in is a system-wide recipe of spaces and places that are designed to support the activities that the librarians are executing each and every day, and supporting their future innovations. And this recipe can be applied throughout the system in a customized recipe for each of the library locations. We have visited 5 libraries today. We will be visiting, I think, 8 more in the next 2, and engaging in a workshop with staff tomorrow. So we have a full 3 days. And that is where we're ending today. So thank you all.
Thank you. Let's give it up for our presenter. As a reminder for our commissioners, before we open up, excuse me, to questions and comments, we do have to open up for public forum, public comment. Any public comment on it?
We have no public comment.
Okay, floor is open for our commissioners. Commissioner Rooney.
My particular hobby horse on this commission is the freedom to read and First Amendment issues. And I heard this morning on KQED
Mhm.
that our esteemed leader is trying to cut funding for public libraries, federal funding.
Mhm.
And what I would like to know is there has been any, when I was on the commission, which was first time, which was several years ago, there was a big brouhaha here about somebody who wanted to determine what books were going to be on the shelves.
Mhm.
Well, I personally put the whammy down on that one. But what I'm interested now, is there any more indication of threats to the First Amendment or threats to the freedom to read here now? I don't know.
I have a comment on that, and I guess it builds upon is like, do we have some core values that we're looking for, like, free and public library and all that means?
Mhm.
And I also wrote down, like, I want to make sure there's a branch in every district. I've been here when that's been moved. And so I guess my question was, are there some overriding values that are like givens that we're going to make sure are included in the next future? And I see it integrated in here,
Mhm.
but I didn't really see our value of diversity and equity as a value. I didn't see a branch in every lot, in every district as a library, free public access. And so I guess my question really is, just to sort of build upon just one comment, like, there are some essential values that I think we have here. And how are those reflected in the planning? Because there's going to be some values that we don't want changed, even in a reimagination of the library,
Mhm.
which I'm all for.
Mhm.
But I guess I'm wanting to know, what are those?
Yeah, thank you, both Commissioner Rooney and Commissioner Gardner. I think it's a two-part question, and starting with Commissioner Rooney's, the broader issue of our principles around intellectual freedom, as we refer to it frequently, access to constitutionally protected free speech. Those are written in our mission, vision, and values. Excuse me. I'm recovering from a cold. Those are already reflected in the library's documents. And so that we would consider those core to our services. And I think we'll be able to come back to the commission as both state and federal legislation may be discussed that could, theoretically threaten those. Currently, we're kind of watching what's going on. I think what Margaret referenced at the beginning is that there's an executive order to cut funding to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which doesn't necessarily threaten California libraries' freedom to read, our freedom, our intellectual freedoms, but it could threaten funding for several critical programs. So we'll bring back more information about that. And I think related, Commissioner Gardner, it's astute, and it's actually what we would love to hear from all the commissioners tonight
Mhm.
is this is the very first engagement session. And so I think our consultant and the library team wants to hear from you. What would you propose those principles are that you'd like to see reflected in the next future of our libraries? The staff certainly has ours. And like I said, our policies do reflect intellectual freedom. They reflect our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and several other, policies that we have. But we really want this process to help inform that with, starting with you as leaders in this space and including everything from our elected leaders to community members across the city. So I'm sure the team is taking note of the two comments that I heard, which is, strong on the freedom to read, and also the operational value of a library in every district.
Mhm.
But just so I can be clear, I have 4.
Oh, good.
We already have several libraries in every district, but maybe you mean
I wanna make
neighborhood.
sure the equity lens also includes.
Microphone?
Also includes materials written in languages that our library needs. We've been trying to increase circulation materials in Spanish and in Chinese, et cetera. I want to make sure that is a core value that continues. Our partnerships with San Jose State for the MLK. And I'm going to put it out here anyway. I'd like to revisit the first 5 partnership in early childhood and their investment in our libraries and early education, particularly in the FRCs. I just think they need to reinvest there. And also our partners with the school districts who we need to strengthen that partnership with our school districts to make sure that they're sending the kids to the branch libraries and that we share those materials together. And so I wanted to put all my values out there so that if we're wrapping it up in a value conversation.
Yep, perfect. And on some of these points, I'm going to just reiterate some of the things that I heard and illustrate how our process deepens some of those guiding principles. So I loved the comment about guiding principles and what are our values. Libraries have historically been designed operationally as spaces of transaction. San Jose Public Library has advanced that work to be a space of community transformation. But one of the techniques that we will be developing and workshopping with the staff co-creation group is how do you show up with the values that are those guiding principles to create stronger experiences. Then in terms of the strengthening partnerships, one of the reasons that we will be engaging community partners in a robust way is to develop strengthened partnerships and garner insights and how the spaces and places can amplify the shared outcome goals of those partners. So those are just 2 ways that your request will be developed in the process.
Commissioner Abastida.
Just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I'm particularly a fan of incorporating nature into library aspects. And the reason for that is just we've seen an uptake of essentially community members, especially children, be more invested in STEM-related majors as they grow up and are influenced and put forward that. So do you have any plans for that to come to fruition?
I love all of your questions because it shows that y'all are thinking ahead of this work in a really wonderful way. There is a science called environmental psychology that states that we are better learners when we bring in elements of nature into the building space. So we've been studying that a good bit and are incorporating those guiding principles as well in our facilities planning. And there is also a practice, many of you in this room may be more familiar with it than I even, but biophilia and biomimicry. And those are techniques in which we can incorporate elements of nature into the built environment. But what I think is great about it, that science, is that it proves that it enables us to be happier people because it makes us more social, and it also opens up the brain spaces that enable us to be better learners. So all of those elements that we can incorporate into the built environment to incorporate elements of nature actually support and reinforce your mission, which is work that we're really pushing forward and really on the, I think, cutting edge as a firm to incorporate that into facilities plans. So thank you for that question.
And a reminder for our youth commissioners too, the floor is open for you all as well.
Do any youth commissioners have any comments or questions so far? Commissioner Kuczynski.
All right. Oh,
Mhm.
so I noticed that your plan is to completely restructure the design of the library interiors. And I had a question about if it's under a full construction,
Mhm.
wouldn't this take away from the present needs of the community and take away the resources that need? And are you considering in your design process how you might be able to combat this? and to come up with a solution to make sure that these people get what they need while it's being improved?
Very good question. So at the end of this work, we will be making recommendations for reimagining the spaces and places. And that doesn't necessarily always mean a full reconstruction of the interior. Sometimes that might mean furniture redesign. Sometimes it might be service redesign. So there'll be a variety of ways. That recommendation will then be used to inform a potential construction project. And I think that's where your question is where the concern would be raised around how is the community being served while a construction project is happening. And typically when we work with libraries that are going through a construction project, there are a variety of ways that they find, whether it's through temporary structures or whether it's through partnerships. So I think by the time a project gets to the place of a construction that would shut down a library or displace library services, there's typically a pretty robust strategic consideration around how those services can ensure that community members are not missing, that the library services aren't missing a beat in serving them. And sometimes it gives the library systems opportunities to be really creative and innovative and find even new and better ways to meet community members where they are.
Thank you.
Commissioner Westfall.
Loved the presentation.
Okay.
Loved the breadth and the depth of what was presented. These are just sparks. They're not fully formed thoughts, but just things that I jotted down. I would love to see a cradle to grave vision in terms of, and what I mean by that is children who are born are brought into the library for immediate learning, for immediate exposure, all the way through to grandparents or, aging adults in whatever capacity and whatever use, whether it's learning to read English or having playtime or anything like that. So that's just one random thing, but that's something that I would love to see across all of the libraries, is having that type of depth, I guess. The kind of the inner use with the schools of bringing, a comment was made about how do we envision making sure that children are coming from the schools and coming to the public libraries. How do you mean the consistency of values when you're doing that? And again, this is just kind of an open-ended question, but how do you get buy-in from the schools? How do you maintain that consistency? So when they go back to the school, it's not a completely different environment where they're not able to have that synergy of experience. I know it's not going to be exactly the same, but in terms of core values, I think it should be. And then my last is I am a student of learning myself, and I believe the best way of learning and the way that the brain works is learning by doing. And so do you imagine all of the libraries to have those spaces where, I mean, the things that I saw here are just incredible in terms of the podcast, the music, the art, all that. Is that something that's going to be captured in all the library proposals, or is that something that is going to be, I guess, beyond a proposal, and you can say, yes, each library will have at least one or two types of spaces like that?
After today's visits, in each one of the library locations, each one of the staff members spoke about all of the content creation type programs that they're doing and how they're doing it in such a resourceful way. And I said, well, don't you need a space for this to all be available? So without telling you yes to an answer where we need discovery, we're seeing a consistent pattern that the maker type spaces, the project-based learning type spaces would be extremely valuable, even though we're seeing that the way that translates already in the 5 libraries that we visited could be very different. That pattern of project-based learning could be very beneficial, almost in the same way we totally geeked out on your Storytime kits today. But in the same way that those are packaged curriculum that have variety built in, I could see a huge opportunity with project-based learning as a curriculum with variety of content creation built into that.
sorry, one last comment. In terms of success metrics, when you're looking at, is this project going to be a success? And are you looking at engagement, like initial engagement? Are you looking at re-engagement? Are you looking at activity? What are your success metrics, I guess, in terms of how you'll be able to say with everybody that this project was a success?
I think all of the above that you mentioned. I think it's engagement. I think it's discovery. Do we have an implementable plan that folks are invigorated by and that can be achievable through funding opportunities that are current and in the future? But again, I think this conversation is also an opportunity for you all to identify what are those success metrics with us. So yes.
Commissioner Pradeep Kumar.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. I had one question about a comment that was made earlier, and I guess essentially that's how would there be a partnership or like some connection between San Jose Public Libraries and school districts? Specifically, like for example, how could schools inform their students on which resources they can get from a San Jose Public Library? Just how will that connection be established, I guess, with this plan?
So there's two parts of that. And one is, I think, is dependent on the staff to help us understand those current relationships that I think Jill could probably speak to. But the other thing that we're observing as we're visiting the libraries is that I think at least 3 of them that we visited today are adjacent to either elementary school, a middle school, or a high school. And that work is already happening. So I think what our strength is that we're coming in and asking, what are those current relationships? And then we can start to identify what are some opportunities to strengthen that relationship so that we can strengthen those patterns. But it's definitely a dialogue with
Yes.
the library system.
Commissioner, that's a great point, and we're definitely going to engage with our school district partners throughout the process so that one of the future visits, they will be a focus group, as well as is invited to some of the larger groups. So we'll have more engagement on that. But thank you for tagging that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Kind of kicking back off what I've been hearing. There's a lot of other libraries that I'd like to hear getting put into this conversation. And is there any prioritization over different districts on kind of funding on this project? Because after hearing all the talk about how the Memphis library got like a makerspace and now they kind of expanded to having their own record label. I feel like hearing about that, there's a lot of hope in many different districts that this could be kind of happening to.
A great question. And can you help me, because I'm just learning the landscape of districts. When you say different districts, what does that mean to you?
So like for me, I think I'll kind of put it into my perspective. District 3 has a lot of Latino, different kinds of cultures and schools that kind of have very low in reading comprehension and kind of being able to learn those skills kind of at a younger age, kind of how I've heard that people born into the libraries. So just kind of different places kind of have different values. So that's what I kind of mean about this.
Okay, great. That's a great clarification. So one of the things about the Margaret Sullivan Studios methodology that has shifted the way that the library industry has traditionally grown program services and facilities. So when I learned to design public libraries, it was really based on demographic growth solely. One of the aspects that our work has introduced is an equity-based approach to growing library services. And I think that speaks to your question, that we will be looking at those demographic opportunities, those socioeconomic opportunities, in order to create a prioritization, to create investment strategies, so that we will be incorporating those aspects into the recommendations.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I love your presentation.
I'd like to jump in with a couple of comments and questions that I had. So I've grouped them into groups. So I'll start with equity. I know that was a big part of your presentation. That's also one of the library's core values. And so the two things that you really mentioned when you were talking about equity were people from marginalized communities and women. And so one recommendation and one thought point that I'd like to add is to extend that bubble of equity, if it's not already including this group, to people with physical or mental capabilities that are different to ours. I think that's important to include when we're designing these libraries, to keep that in mind. The second thing is culture. I'm from District 10 and I have, commissioners from all other districts. And so I think that what makes San Jose unique is that each district, I think, is different. And since it's such a big city, there's so much diversity and so much culture that exists within each district. And so we were in a joint meeting with LEC a couple of months ago at the Biblioteca Latinoamericana Library, and there was this mural on the wall that demonstrated the culture of that community. And so I think that keeping that in mind of that culture and that identity in libraries and a public space is definitely important. I loved your piece on innovation. I think that since we're in Silicon Valley at the heart of innovation, it's important that our public spaces reflect that as well. And so one of our youth commissioners is actually hosting a Creative Futures Fair, shout out District 7, in the coming months. And so I think that that's great to encourage innovation, entrepreneurship. I know the library has entrepreneurship for arts. And so I think that having spaces that are open to youth and not only to youth, but also other people is definitely important. And then one of the things that I really resonated with was you talked about the loneliness epidemic. And so I remember in middle school, I used to go home from Dartmouth Middle School and I used to go to Vineland Library. And so I would hang out with my friends and I would see all different age groups just walk by. And I feel like in these public spaces, there's a lot of, so libraries to me encourage a lot of different people of different age groups, from little toddlers all the way up to older people. And so one of the things I've noticed is that there's little interaction between these different groups. And so you said in your presentation that you wanted to create conditions for this interaction. I wanted to know, like, what does conditions mean? Is that interactions in just workshops? Is it the facilities? What does the conditions mean in order to facilitate that interaction between different age groups of people?
Excellent question. Oh my goodness, y'all are so lucky to have all this talent in this room. So as architects and designers, we use the language. We want to create the conditions that foster the learning experience that the librarians are designing as a program. So what that translates to is a study of what is the learning experience that the educator, the librarian wants to create, and then how do we as architects use the concrete elements of architecture and interior design to enable that to happen. And then the placemaking component is how do then we ensure that, in the customer experience component is how do we then ensure that we're using the process to co-create and co-design with the librarians for the staffing elements to also be leveled up to create those conditions. So that's a conceptual answer. The way we do it is we study things like what kind of environments make us feel good. We go into Starbucks and we say, what makes this environment feel good to people? We count ceiling tiles. We say the space is 20 feet by 20 feet. That feels like a really great living room. That feels like a place where people want to gather. What kind of furniture are we seeing? That variety of furniture that, a great coffee shop has. And then we start to integrate those elements into the library experience, because I would imagine you all have experienced a library where you walk in and there's one type of seating only and one type of table. But we're studying these environments in other places to incorporate those into the library. Another example would be for project-based learning, when we've studied what those conditions are to make project-based learning successful. It's having stations along the perimeter of a room where 5 to 10 people can gather and work on a project together, but then come together in the middle of the room to share their learnings and reflect on their learnings. So those are the practical and tactical ways in which we start to explore those answers.
Commissioner Sanchez.
I remember at the start of your presentation, you kind of talked about some visioning stations that you guys have. How do you guys get a different type of, how do I say this, community engagement into it?
So with community engagement, in terms of visioning, so we have somewhat of a formula of going out to the community, which is we start our presentations by introducing folks to the project and what the project goals are. And then because of our work being strength-based, we ask folks, what are the strengths of your community? What are the strengths of your library? That builds trust and gets people really excited and in a good mood and proud. Then we introduce, we call it the Imagine the Possibilities section, which we start saying, look what they're doing in Memphis. Look what they're doing in Columbia. And, that gets people excited, just like you got excited. And then we start to ask them, not all of these ideas will work for your community, but what would you want to see in your community that fills your needs, that fills gaps, that your community members would enjoy? And then that starts that conversation. And then we use we use gamification. We got to learn how to do some gamification that y'all would think is on par. But we use a lot of interactive materials that get folks to become architects and designers to help give us feedback of what they would be interested in seeing, doing, and desiring for their public spaces.
Commissioner Westphal.
If you look around Silicon Valley, we're very fast paced. And if you look at the architecture, you can kind of tell when buildings were built just by the look and feel, the glass or the colors that they use, the types of materials. What's the typical half-life, or what's the typical, I guess, reassessment or regurgitation period of the projects? Like how long do you anticipate that needs will be met with the proposals that are made, I guess? Is it like a 10-year type of deal, 20-year? I mean, at what point, or is our society moving so quickly that we don't know the answer to that? And it's just kind of an open-ended question at this point.
Yes, 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 and
Okay.
yes. It's interesting because in my career, which I'll say is 25 years, but it might almost be 30, there are different approaches to the longevity of the investment of a project. And we're working on a project in Omaha right now, which is a central library, and that's a 100-year building. So the investment and the choices that are being made in that investment are in context of a 100-year building. Sometimes with branch libraries, you may want them to have a shorter half-life because you want them to be places and spaces where you can constantly evolve and prototype. So I think that alignment comes with that balance of investment and longevity, and is specific in particular to the conditions that we're in. And sometimes it's financial. Sometimes financial drives those decisions. And I think ultimately meeting communities where they are with service and programs is the most important driver to how that investment will be made, and how you all will prioritize that investment for the quality.
All right,
Commissioner Mishra.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is regarding the iterative process on inclusive design that you mentioned earlier in your slideshow. I wanted to ask how this specific process was intentionally designed and what factors were specifically taken into account. And I guess more importantly, which community ideals were considered more important than others, and the process behind how those goals were specifically prioritized. And I guess this is especially given how other commissioners mentioned the diversity and the different demographics across all the different districts and libraries in San Jose.
Great question. So when we use the term iterative, what we're meaning is that with each discovery, we are re-informing the next phase of the work. So what we are bringing to this process is a rigor that has a precedent in some of the work much of the work that we've done in the past. But what this trip is really intended to do is to hear your questions, hear your concerns, hear your guiding principles, hear your values. And we take that back with us after this trip to refine that iterative process to reflect the goals that you all are identifying in tonight's meeting, that we will be hearing from the staff and leadership in the coming days. So we will be incorporating that feedback to refine the approach and methodology to reflect your goals and your values.
So, sorry, just to clarify, based on like the values that we like discussed in this
Mhm.
meeting, would they be implemented in like different ways across different libraries, or would it be like a very streamlined, very, I guess, the same kind of approach to all of them?
I think they'll be customized, and Jill, you may.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I think that we want to have some similarities because we're a system.
Mhm.
We definitely recognize that we don't want a cookie cutter approach. Our communities or our neighborhoods are different, and they each they reflect, some of the art and the nature of the different communities. So I think to that point, we're open to having them be different
Mhm.
based on the different needs of the community.
Mhm.
And also, if you have different options, you guys are all mobile on transit. You could go to different branches that have different options as well. So we could consider that, I think, through
Mhm.
the process.
Mhm.
All right, thank you so much.
Commissioner Bonso.
This isn't like a question, but when I was younger, I remember I used to go to the Willow Glen Branch Library and like talking about what you said about architecture. There was chairs and benches, and there was like a really comfortable bench that I would always like nap on after I read when I was like 3 years old. And I just want to say like the work you're doing is so important, and it's like a childhood memory for me. And I feel like there's just so much appreciation that I think we all have for like libraries and people like you all who like help to maintain them and keep them alive. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a collaboration. It truly is.
Commissioner Liu.
So I know that you're very early in your planning process. So I'm gonna backtrack a little. I'm gonna ask you about, some of the experiences and project that you've been working on. And hopefully you can shine some light into that. There will be two questions. After the first question, I'll give you some time to answer. And then I'll go to the second question. So, I'm sure that in the process of building a plan to update our facilities, you've studied past updates that the city of San Jose has had in the libraries. Is there anything there in your past review that stood out to you?
So excellent question, because even today we were starting to see patterns when we visited the libraries that I think there was a building system-wide facilities work done maybe in 2013, around that time period.
We did a facilities need assessment.
Uh-huh.
It was really around like what are the systems and the infrastructure that needed to be replaced, like roofs, carpets, things like that.
And the other thing that we were observing is that there was some initial renovations of some of the existing facilities that generated a pattern around, and y'all is more familiar than even I, but the marketplace concept of display. And so all of those innovations that were happening were kind of the first step at what our work was built upon.
Right.
But some of the learnings of that was that there are a lot of built-in displays, a lot of built-in desks. And so that's inhibited the flexibility and adaptability. So we're seeing that more actually through the visits than even through the study of some of the previous facilities plans.
Thank you for that, Ms. Sullivan. And my second question, and I'm gonna preface this with a little story. In Jacksonville, the city manager and a group of electeds tour a library facility. And they went to the encyclopedia section, and when they grabbed the books out and they blew on the top those encyclopedia books, so much dust blew off because of the lack of usage of those books. And so they worked to gut that encyclopedia section and replace it with a new auditorial system. And in that process, there was a librarian that was, old school, that loved encyclopedias and couldn't imagine, another world that's replacing these books, right? So to that point, how will you plan for in your strategy and in your outputs to train staff to understand the updates that are going into these facilities, because adult needs and youth needs can be very different, so that they can help assist citizens when opportunities like that arise?
That is an excellent question, and that in many ways is the core of the opportunity. I'll say that the advancement of the public library into being a place for people rather than a place for things presents itself. We all have a nostalgia towards our experience with public libraries, and that nostalgia can be an attachment to a bench, or it can be an attachment to a book, or it can be an attachment to a mural. And so that nostalgia is something that's really important for us to really understand deeply. The second part that you're speaking to is how do we operationalize to the most efficient and the most effective with the resources that we have? And when public libraries were first introduced in this country, books were scarce. Now books themselves are plenty, but information is still such a core essential service. And this anecdote, the Altadena Public Library, even after the Eaton fires, is still standing. They're having an opening celebration on Saturday, but they lost 2.5 miles of fiber. So the city didn't have internet. And what that really revealed was that what the community members needed was internet and Wi-Fi services. And so that's another way in which we start to shift what are the needs of those resources, collections, and technologies. So I'm answering this question from a variety of perspectives, but the work that we're doing is taking advantage of the fact that public library systems can really distribute resources, whether that's collections, whether that's Wi-Fi hotspots, much more efficient and effectively, and that enables you all to free up that space in the public library buildings for those wonderful maker spaces, project-based learning, social connections, and that over time, what those collections and resources are can adapt and change to what community members are requesting.
Okay. In a past project, maybe if you could, cite something, based off recall, how have you supported staff in transitioning to use those new facilities?
So we co-create those designs with the staff and help them through a process of, and I'll say specifically for our work in Columbia, South Carolina, for Richland Library, where we were really, as an industry for the first time, this was 12 years ago, as an industry for the first time, looking at that question, how much of the collections on the floor can we displace for people space? And so it was a process of discovery and engagement, and using the process of illustrating what that looked like in plan, modeling it for what it looked like in 3 dimensions, and even doing, I kid you not, doing improv to kind of prototype what that experience would be for the staff and for the community members. And that helped us develop some best practice precedents for the relationship between what percentage of the floor space is dedicated to the collections and what percentage of the floor space was dedicated to the variety of learning experiences. And that work resulted in a 75% public space, 25% allocation of collections. But we did it with the staff and they helped us develop that, that ratio.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to note, during this visit, we're kicking off the in-person staff engagement. So to sort of bring staff along and get their feedback on the future vision. And in the next visit, you'll be notified in advance, but we're looking in the next few months at scheduling the next time the team comes out. We're going to do a broader community breakfast with a very large number of folks. We hope that all of you will participate. And like I said, we'll start the focus groups and other opportunities, and you'll all receive invitations for those opportunities as well.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap things up? Because we do have another big presentation coming up too. Yes, Commissioner McCrary.
Thank you so much for your presentation. One thing that I hope is considered in all of this and is not overlooked is need for adult literacy in a lot of these spaces. You know, in an area such as ours that is so technologically advanced and literate, right, there is still a great need for adult literacy assistance and programming in our community.
Thank you. As a reminder, folks, this is an informational item. This is the start of a long process for us. And as Jill said, they will be tapping into our expertise in the near future to share out how we can do this. So as a reminder, folks, this is an informational item, so it does not require any action. Let's give it up again for our presenter. And I'll turn it over to my co-chair to take over our next steps.
Our next action item will be item 5B, Children and Youth Services Master Plan, presented by Ms. Buzo.
Myself comfortable here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Laura Buzo with the City of San Jose Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services. I'm here to provide you an update on the Children Youth Services Master Plan. Can't believe a whole year has passed. We did this same convening last year, and so thank you again for hosting. So a lot has happened. So this is a great opportunity to share what we've done since our last update. So, as you know, the pandemic had a devastating impact across the country and internationally, as we know, as well as in our own communities. And the City Council and administration recognize that children and youth, especially from specific communities in San Jose, were impacted the most, especially those communities that already had socioeconomic challenges. They were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, worsening their living conditions. And consequently, they were facing even more difficulty in overcoming the challenges and barriers as a result of the pandemic, especially around health, mental health, economic recovery, and just their overall social and emotional well-being, as you know, due to the isolation that many in our community experience, especially our young people having to transition from in-person instruction to then remote learning. So in response, in the mayor's June 2021 budget message, the city manager's office was directed to develop what they called at the time a Cradle to Career Youth Development Master Plan that we are now referring to as the Children Youth Services Master Plan. And the hope was really to be more proactive and intentional about how we serve our young people in our communities so we can really strengthen their assets, provide them greater opportunities for overall success. So we started the development of the Children Youth Services Master Plan by first spearheading a robust community engagement process, as we know, as was discussed earlier. We can't do this work in isolation. We really need to hear from community on what are their challenges, their barriers, but also their vision and their dreams for young people and for their families. And so as a result, we engaged over 3,000 individuals through town halls, interviews, surveys, and I want to recognize the Youth Commission in that we were able to co-host a couple of youth engagement opportunities. We hosted a youth town hall at Seven Trees Community, where I think we had like 70 middle school students, and then another one at Independence Library, where we had, I think, like another 40 or so high school students. And then we also hosted a couple virtual Zoom focus groups. And so it was those types of activities that we found were really important to, again, really make sure that we were hearing from community on what were their hopes and dreams for young people. And so out of that, and then, I'm sorry, in addition to that, we also engaged over 120 organizations, school districts, elementary, middle school, high school, community-based organizations, our county departments, city staff, our older adults, our seniors, our caregivers, special needs communities. And so again, we tried really hard and intentional to engage diverse communities. And so out of all of that engagement activity efforts, as you can imagine, we gathered a lot of content and information. And so in working with our consultants, we tried to kind of, synthesize everything we heard and gathered through our surveys. And so as part of that process, we reconvened a smaller group, kind of a work group, to help us kind of synthesize and understand what we heard from community. And so out of that process is how we came up with the vision statement, the guiding values, and the priority areas. And so again, I want to emphasize that this was done with community throughout the process. And so the vision that came up out of this process was that we want to foster a future where every child and youth in San Jose blossoms into healthy, resilient, thriving adults, enriched with equitable opportunities to work, play, dream, and prosper within the vibrant landscape of Silicon Valley. And we know that that's a very ambitious and very holistic approach, but that was the intent, because we really wanted to make sure that we were thinking about young people from birth all the way to adulthood, and really thinking about all the things that they need to be able to prosper and do well in our community. And what we heard consistently also is that whatever happens kind of comes out of the master plan, that we needed to have guiding values as part of that decision-making process, as part of that development process. And so again, the community said that we really needed to think about equity, accessibility, and inclusion for all youth. And accessibility and inclusion was not only for children, youth, and their families that may have various learning abilities or physical abilities, but also just economic access, and also distance. How long are those resources and opportunities going to be easily available to them in their communities? It was important that again, whatever we do out of the result of the master plan, that we make sure that it's outcome and results driven, that we are able to demonstrate the impact that we're having on our children's and youth well-being and their developmental trajectory. We need to ensure that we focus on cross-sector collaboration, investment, and accountability. Kind of on that same mantra, we can't do this work alone. We have to do it with community. And so making sure that we keep that in mind throughout. And then, of course, that we continue to be youth and community voice-driven. We need to really lean on the experiences, the insights, the assets of our youth in our community as part of this process. And then the 7 priority areas, again, came from those same community engagement processes. And interesting enough, this came across whichever population we engaged with, whether it was middle school students or grandparents or service providers. They said that we really needed to focus on these areas because these are the areas that that are really essential to the development of children and youth and their families. And so we needed to focus on early learning and childcare, learning and empowerment, health and mental wellness, housing access and security, meaningful sustaining jobs, safe, clean, and connected communities. And then in addition to these areas, it was important that we really think about kind of that system transformation, that it's one thing to focus on these individual areas, but we need to think of this as a system. Again, how are we doing this work collectively? And really thinking about those kind of systemic structural barriers that are in place that continue to leave young people out of prosperity, economic mobility, and also leave them behind. And so we really need to kind of look internally to really look at what are those barriers and challenges that we create within our own systems, and then how can we support each other in that work. And so, as I mentioned, the Children Youth Services Master Plan was approved by City Council on April 9th. And so as part of this work, it was important that as we move forward and realize the vision of the Children Youth Master Plan, it was important that we include these key elements. That we focus on the guidance on policy priorities, investments, and alignment of programs, not only internally within the city of San Jose as a government public entity, but also externally with like counties, school districts, and others, that we make sure that we're really understanding what the impacts of those policies are having, or lack of investments or inequitable investments, and then ensuring that we're aligning and leveraging programs and resources. That we're operationalizing the San Jose Bill of Rights for children and young adults that was approved by City Council and supported by the Youth Commission. That we make sure that we focus on a strategic and coordinated approach to developing the City of San Jose system of care. Because what we need to do is make sure that we have a safety net for children, youth, and their families from prevention to intervention. We have many valuable and important services that are having a huge impact in our community. But what often happens is they're not coordinated and they're not integrated, or the systems themselves don't know what other services and supports are available to families. And so how do we create this system of care that really supports children and youth in navigating these resources and supports? And then that we also consider a continuum of support for children and youth from cradle to career. We know that the program services and support that a family may need for a child 0 to 5 obviously is going to look very different for a young adult who maybe has just graduated out of high school or is having difficulty graduating from high school. What are those supports that they need as part of their overall well-being? And then, of course, that we have long-term and sustainable impact and measurable outcomes. We need to, again, demonstrate that we are having measurable impact in the work that we're doing collectively. Are we actually moving the needle and, again, improving the overall well-being of young people and their developmental trajectory? So we wanted to include this visual. We thought it gives just kind of a nice roadmap of the work that has been done over the course of the last year with the approval of the Children Youth Services Master Plan. As you can see, we started with the master plan. For us, thinking about the master plan was kind of phase one of the work. What we wanted to ensure was that we weren't just creating a master plan to then be able to put on a shelf and then as you mentioned earlier, Commissioner Liu, you know, have it be all dusty and then we're like trying to rub the dust off, but really make sure that it was a living document, that we are doing something with that document. And so we went into this knowing that the Children Youth Services Master Plan document is phase one of the work. And then phase two is, okay, what do we do once that master plan has been approved? And so once the master plan was approved, we coordinated a number of working groups that we'll talk a little bit more in detail in the next slides. But this gives you just a nice visual of the work that has been done over the course of the last year or so. So again, with the approval of the Children Youth Services Master Plan, we moved into launching a collaborative co-design group around developing the system of care. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure, again, as we talk about being intentional and strategic, is that we wanted to align this work with the work that the County of Santa Clara is doing around the county's system of care. Because we know that we, the city as an organization, we're limited in the types of services that we can offer, right? We don't have health clinics or mental health services necessarily. And so we wanted to make sure that we align our work with that of the county so that we can facilitate that coordination of services. And so early on, as we started the development of the City of San Jose system of care, we really wanted it to be informed throughout the process with what the county was doing. And so as part of that work, we convened a group of about 30 community stakeholders representing 20 organizations, again, school districts, county departments, city staff, community-based organizations, library staff was involved as well. And as well as families, we wanted to make sure that parents and youth were at the table. And so part of this work was then to talk about what is the no wrong door? How can we facilitate access to services is essentially what we're saying, is that how can we have different entry points in our community that will support families and youth in accessing services. So that could be the library, it could be a community center, it could be a school or a community-based organization. And so part of that work around the no wrong door service delivery model was thinking about what are all those key elements that we need to have in place in order to support families and youth in accessing those services. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. And then the other work that we did was working with city staff across departments, as well as external partners in mapping of city services. And what we did is looked at services available from all the way from prevention or universal services, such as an example is workshop at a community center or a recreation program or a literacy program at the library, all the way to intervention services, which could be more of a high-end, high dosage. That services is more geared for families who are in crisis. Maybe they're at the point where they may have to abandon their apartment or have been displaced or are seeking mental health services. And so really thinking about all those services that we offer in the community along that continuum. And then the other work that we did was convene a priority area work groups. And so I mentioned we have 7 priority areas. We invited folks from throughout the community to help us take a look at the goals and objectives in the master plan around each of those priority areas and help us refine them, because we knew that, again, they were very ambitious and we really needed to refine them to really think about, okay, what are those specific goals and objectives that we want to focus on for each of those priority areas moving forward. And so as part of that process, we were able to engage over 120 individuals representing 60 organizations, many of the same ones that I've mentioned. And we met over around a 6 to 7 month period, both in large group and small groups, and really having them look at those individual priority areas and think about all those different goals and objectives that we should have for each of them. And then I know many of you have heard about Blue Zones. As you know, from the very beginning, when discussion came about possibly having Blue Zones in San Jose, one of the first objectives that had to be done was do a Blue Zones readiness assessment. And so that was completed last fall. Blue Zones organizations presented to City Council, as well as I know they came to some of the commission meetings to provide information on their findings. And so after that presentation in October, we've had some additional follow-up meetings with the Blue Zones organizations, as well as a Blue Zones steering committee, which is comprised of community members. I know some commissioners sit on that. And so the work around Blue Zones has not quite yet been defined. They are still pursuing additional funding to see if they'll realize the recommendations within Blue Zones. And so there's more discussion to happen around that. I'm sure we'll bring that to you in the future. We don't have a specific date on that. But one thing that we have been very clear about launching Blue Zones, if it does happen, is that we need to make sure that we're aligning that with the Children Youth Services Master Plan. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of kind of the cornerstones of the master plan, once it was approved, was developing the system of care. And so as part of this collaborative work group is it was really important for us to think about what is that journey that we want to put in place so that as families or young people access a service, what is that experience going to be like, and how are we going to support them in navigating those different access points for services? And so this provides you just a nice visual of what that journey would look like. And then the next slide will give you a little bit more specific kind of step-by-step process, but I think this gives you just kind of nice overview of what that journey is. So to the far left is basically that entry point, right? So it could be a community center, it could be a library. There would need to be a screening so we can determine the level of need of that family or that young person. Also taking into account what are their goals, what is it they want to accomplish, and so that would be a partnership between it could be a care coordinator or a navigator working side by side with the young person and their families in identifying those resources and supports that they would need, and then having an integrated, coordinated system of partners will help us better support the young person and their families in accessing the different resources and supports. And then at the far right there, you can see the progress monitoring. So making sure that, again, staff are working closely with the young person and their families in determining if progress is being made. Are there other additional needs that may have emerged during that time? Or are there other needs and supports that they would like to access? So like I said, think of the other page just kind of like the cover page, and then this is more a step-by-step process. And so, and this is something that would be implemented by our partners around really kind of helping the young person, the family, determine what is their level of need. Is it a tier 1, meaning it's a universal service or activity? Maybe it's a young person just wanting to know about college. What how do you apply for college? What's the application process? All the way to tier 3 to then crisis, right? So think of tier 3 as kind of like that high dosage, intensive service. The young person or their family are in crisis. Maybe they're dealing with some mental health issues, substance use, and making sure, again, that we're supporting them in that coordination and access to the services. So another piece of our work over the last few months has been funding Healthier Kids Foundation to conduct visual, dental, hearing, and universal screenings for elementary and middle school students at three of the elementary school districts: Morgan Hill, Franklin McKinley, and Luther Burbank. Just wanted to note that Morgan Hill, we're obviously focusing on schools within the city of San Jose. And so over the course of the last 6 months or so, they've been able to conduct 934 screenings. In addition to the screenings, if there's any concerns that came up as part of that screening process, they have an advocate that works with the family to be able to access the appropriate health support service. So if there's a concern about, let's just say maybe they identify that the child may need glasses, and they'll make sure that they refer them to an optometrist and then support them with accessing their health insurance and making sure that they get the appropriate glasses that they need. So the parent advocate will work with the individual family to address any of the concerns that may have come up as part of the screening. And before the end of the school year ends, Healthier Kids Foundation will be providing an additional 700 screenings to these schools as well as to Alum Rock School District. And so the next step in our process with the Children Youth Services Master Plan is, as I mentioned, we've been working collectively with the cross-sector of community partners, families, and young people around developing the system of care. And so we know that this is quite an endeavor. And so as part of our recommendation to City Council last year was that we felt it would be really important to launch this at a smaller scale. And so that we recommended, and this was recommended by our community partners and our families and City Council, that we should launch a pilot site or pilot program, and we would do this in 2 demonstration communities. And so this would be in the Pokeway Mayfair community and in the Seven Trees Santee communities. And the reason that we focused on those communities was, while they have a lot of assets and great collaboratives, these are also communities, as I mentioned previously, were deeply impacted by the pandemic and continue to have challenges and barriers that greatly impact our young people. And so we felt that these would be kind of these manageable communities that we could kind of develop this learning lab in creating the system of care, really understanding what are those key elements that we need to have in place before we consider launching in other communities. And then, as we mentioned, we weren't quite done in refining the goals and objectives with our priority area work groups. We have just completed that and are in the process of fleshing those out, and we will be presenting that to City Council. And then in the next few months, our goal is to secure an evaluator to help us develop a full evaluation framework where we ensure that we are integrating the priority areas, the goals and objectives, but also the work that we're doing around the demonstration sites. And then we'll continue to work collectively across departments. And so one of our key goals is in the coming months is develop a work plan with our departments and how we continue to align our programs, our initiatives across the various departments with the Children Youth Services Master Plan. Continue to do some asset mapping, identify where are those assets and the strength, and then where are those areas where we need to ensure that we are possibly, reinvesting or securing additional funding to address those gaps in services and programs. And then as we launch the demonstration sites, we've been able to develop some tools. So for example, we have a universal intake form that we developed collectively with our partners. We've identified some assessment and screening tools. And so as we launch the demonstration work, we'll be utilizing some of those. And so we often know that as you launch a program, you have to take into account some refinement and some continuous quality improvement. And so we'll be doing that as well in the coming months. And especially as we consider expanding to other communities, we want to make sure that we understand pretty clearly what are those key components and elements that we need to have in place before we launch into other communities. And that's the end of my update. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your
Yes.
report. Before we move to commission discussion, do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay, so then we'll move on to commission discussion. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments about the presentation? Commissioner Baker.
Check, check. All right. First off, thank you for your presentation. He's back, son. Couple of things that are on my mind. First, I'm always continuously proud of San Jose every single time I come to these meetings, just to learn about all the different departments and all the different things that we do across the city. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for educating me this evening. Also, shout out Jill, Cassie, for these agendas that you all put together. This is always great. I want to talk about the safety net. 3 in particular areas. I'm curious about use cases. I'm curious about access and progress monitoring. I have a couple of questions that kind of all feed in together. I'm on slide 48, the progress and accomplishments, collective impact and approach. I like that infographic on the left, starting with folks walking in. It's like, you are here. I'm curious about what are some of the top service use cases that we are seeing specifically for youth? And then going forward with that, how are those services being promoted in a youth-friendly medium so that that information is out there? Part B with that would be within the library, how are we promoting those services and what can we do to improve? And you can tell I'm just really curious about access. Lastly, in slide 50, where the school districts are mentioned, Morgan Hill, Franklin McKinley, Burbank, were those families inbound or was there some sort of marketing or promotion that went out to those schools?
Okay.
And let me know if you want me to repeat those questions. I wrote them down.
Let me try your first round of questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I want to thank and acknowledge the library. They have been a huge asset in this work. Again, this was done across many departments. Some of the things that we heard from community and that we continue to hear even now, right, as we're starting to delve more into this work, is that we have invaluable programs that we offer, right? Recreation, we offer youth intervention services for young people who may have been in gangs and are trying to transition out or, have been involved in the juvenile justice system. We have, phenomenal library services and those kinds of things. I think where we need to strengthen our efforts, and this is not only internally but externally, is that we don't do quite a good job in transitioning youth and families from our programs across that continuum. And so even internally within Parks and Rec, right, we have, as an example, we have our San Jose Recreation Preschool Program. I don't know that we do a great job, right, or in really supporting families in transition into like the after-school programs, right? Or maybe the sports programs, or, we have a studio in one of our community centers. So it's like, how can we maintain that safety net across that developmental continuum and across departments? As an example as well, we have, young people that may have been involved in the juvenile justice system and are involved in our youth intervention services. Are we really connecting those young people to internships and work and, other programs and services that we have within the city? And so it's kind of those gaps that we know for sure that we need to help support those linkages. So it's not families having to figure it out themselves, right? Or young people having to figure out themselves. And then the other piece is, you're right, one of the things that we need to focus on is how are we communicating and promoting this information to young people? The way I grew up, right, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all these other things, right? And so how are we taking advantage of those things, but also of how young people receive information? And so it's those kinds of things that we're going to be working on. We've been partnering with Sobrato Philanthropies as an example, as part of our youth engagement process to make sure that we are using youth language that they understand. And also youth language that is respectful and engaging, that we're not, I hate to say this word, but we're not dumbing it down for them, right? Because they understand this, and they're coming to us and say, yes, this is what we need, but you're not communicating it to us the way we need to have you communicate it to us. And so as part of this youth engagement process is we're having those honest conversations, and they have been very open that they want to be part of that process. In developing the language, in developing the process of how do we help young people through this journey, and what are those different steps that they need to help them across each of those processes. So we'll continue to do that. Again, Sobrato Philanthropies has been instrumental. The Youth Commission has been instrumental in being engaged from the very beginning, as well as our city department and other partners.
And just the curiosity about inbound. So are you finding, like,
Yes.
for
So
example,
Yes.
Mhm.
So with Healthier Kids Foundation, this is actually a leverage funding. So the county has also invested on Healthier Kids Foundation to do these health screenings. So we, with our grant funding to them, we've been able to kind of expand the number of children and youth that are being screened. This is being done at the school during school time. And so, Healthier Kids in the school districts and the schools are communicating this to parents, or scheduling it at school time by classrooms. And so that was one way to make sure that, families weren't have to, take time off work or having to travel. And then if a child is not available during that scheduled time, they're scheduling kind of makeup sessions so that they can try and capture as many kids during the school time. Did I answer all your questions?
you did, and to your point, just about that last program and it happening during the school day, that becomes the ongoing question is, how do you interact with youth in this place where they're going to be, and the school is that place more oftentimes than not? And so even with these other services that potentially youth or someone in the juvenile justice system, with those folks who are there throughout that 8 to 3 o'clock day, they already have 10,000 things to do. I'm a teacher myself. But how do we help them get the information to youth is the ongoing question.
Absolutely. And again, we're having those same discussions. As part of the unit that I oversee, again, we're serving youth that may not be as engaged in school, or are transitioning, from juvenile justice system. And so that's work that we continue to focus on, is how do we engage the young people that may not be connected to some of those support systems, and help create that support network. And so doing that with our different departments, but also with our other partners, like CASA, Fostering Promise, other organizations that focus on supporting young people who aren't maybe engaged in school or other formal organizations.
Any youth commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Vu.
Sorry. I know you presented about the first implementation site that you guys had. Or the first 3 implementation sites that you guys had. So I was wondering what lessons you guys learned from that initial implementation, and what will be most important to consider as you scale to serve more children and youth.
Yeah. So we're actually just in the process to get ready to launch. And so we're hoping we'll be launching by June 30th, before the end of the fiscal year. And so we kind of did some pre-planning. And so all of this work that you're seeing in advance is work that we did with community to then say, okay, these are some of the things that we want to make sure that we have in place as we launch the demonstration sites. It's kind of, designing those key elements. And so as now that we're transitioning into actually launching with our community partners, that'll be within the next couple of months. As I mentioned, we're hoping that by June 30th. And then this next year, it'll be an 18-month project. But we are looking at expanding that with additional support from the county and other entities. And so we're really going to use these next 18 months to be part of that learning process. And I'll be coming back to share more specific and concrete milestones and accomplishments around that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Arroyo.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I did have a question. I think you addressed this a little bit during the presentation, but I guess it's a little bit more specific. But going into this project, were there certain areas that your team kind of knew you would need to focus on a little more and that would need more help? And is your approach towards those areas going to be slightly different, or is it going to be the same, just more in depth?
Yeah. What we're hearing a lot from community is that young people and their families are in dire need of health, whether it's physical health, mental health services, just the inability to access those services for a number of reasons, right? Maybe they don't know how, or sometimes there's different barriers to why they don't access those services. So that's been very clear. So that's one piece. The other piece is that there's considerable research that shows if you can break the cycle of poverty through education, that will increase their opportunities for economic mobility, right? And so that's another area that we're focusing on, is again, trying to focus as much as we can on prevention. How do we support young people, as was mentioned earlier, to stay engaged, right? To stay engaged in school. We don't want to dictate that every person needs to, graduate with the 4-year college degree. But let's find them opportunities to be able to identify their own career path or educational plan. And so that's a huge gap that we're hearing as well from young people. And then, of course, housing, right? What we heard often from young people is that they're worried they're not going to be able to stay here, that they're not going to be able to, raise families and find a job that's going to help them pay for their rent or buy a house. And so those are real concerns that are coming up for young people. And then fourth, young people are under an enormous amount of stress because their families are under an enormous amount of stress because of the high cost of living. And so how do we, again, support young people through that process? So I would say those are kind of like the key elements that we will be focusing on, and then identifying the partners who can help support some of that work.
Commissioner Singh.
Hi, thank you so much for that insightful presentation. It was really informative. So I just had a quick clarifying question, kind of adding on to Commissioner Baker's question regarding outreach. Is there any specific or any plan to convey or advertise this plan through the youth through specifically high schools? And if so, how can they help?
Yes. Yes, we've been fortunate in that we've had, especially right now, because we're focusing on these, what we're calling the demonstration sites, right? We have been working closely with Alum Rock School District, Franklin McKinley, Eastside Union, but also the community colleges, and then also some of our career technical schools to make sure that we have them involved in helping us coordinate some of that communication, promotion, and then, of course, our community-based organizations, right? Because again, as was mentioned earlier, not all of our young people are connected to a school for a number of reasons. And so how do we find those different ways of connecting and engaging with young people wherever they may be? And so it'll be those kind of partnerships that we'll rely on to make sure that we get the information out. And then secondly, it'll be really important to have young people be part of that effort, because who do you listen to, right? It's your peers, is those your own social network. And so making sure that we have young people in those roles to help us with that process.
Commissioner Liu.
Thank you for presenting it. I think, I'm going to provide a perspective here, and I'm sure Ms. Puzo, this will be very familiar to you. So, one of the things that I'm thinking about, amongst other things, I want to preface this with, Eastside has a lot of great characteristics, and I want to note that. But it also goes through a lot of its own challenges. And, amongst one of them, our roles is to engage with, our community and to understand. And one of the things that I came across was, when we're in the classroom at Overfelt, there are students who will have a particular perspective about a teacher based off of first impression. Oh, she's too strict. That's the face value that young person is going to go off of in and throughout the rest of their interactions, and they won't go beyond that. And this, touches on a lot of systemic things too. But, you mentioned co-creation as something that you tried to build into the master plan. I'm wondering, amongst other things, we do a good job about shaping resources with youth, but I wonder if you have a plan that would collect data on how young people respond and perceive these resources.
Yeah, that'll definitely be important. Yes. And so as part of our kind of continuous quality improvement process will be that, right? Is not only understanding the impact that we're having as far as the services, but what is that experience like, right? Everything from, and these were the conversations that we had with our partners and our families is, you know, even from just entry, right? We'll have to be mindful, as was mentioned earlier, the language, right? The nuances of different communities, even from neighborhood to neighborhood, right? And so really kind of understanding that participant, that youth experience, a family experience throughout this journey. Because at any time, if we're not mindful of that and we're not understanding it, you can easily turn people away, right? Or turn them off, or create just a very negative experience, as you mentioned, right? And so, so that'll be part of our evaluation process. Is what is their experience, but then we'll also have to step out of our comfort zone and, you know, also ask who are those communities that should be accessing these services or that we have designed this for and they're not accessing them. What is it that's preventing them? So we'll have to think about that as well.
Sorry, I can't read.
That's okay.
Commissioner Gardner.
Okay, I'm overwhelmed and I really appreciate your presentation today. As you know, I've followed this for years, sat in a lot of meetings and to really see it come together. And I really want to compliment you on how you've been able to present it in like 10 slides or less. And so I just really, I mean, I know Laura, you've worked hard, Angel worked hard, Rebecca's worked hard, but you can really see it in the outcome here. And so I want to thank you for the work. I guess my one question is that, and you mentioned it earlier, is the silos that the city has, Parks and Rec. So what's the cross training that's happening for all the staff? So if it is a no wrong door process, then that means from the person that you see at when you walk in at the Parks and Rec or at the library should all know that if they see someone that they can offer a service or let them know about it. And so I guess my question is what's happening on the training of all the staff so that we're not missing people when they walk in the door, from the, you know, really from the janitor to the head librarian. And so, you know, all this work that you put in is, you know, great work. And if we're really trying to catch people before they hit the bottom of the safety net, and that's your goal here, how are we training the staff so that we meet the people from where they are?
Yes.
So that's my question. Anyway, and kudos.
Thank you.
Over and over.
Thank you. Yes, that is a question that has come up across the board, not only internally, but also with our external partners. And so, as I mentioned, in the next step of this work is we have to meet internally within the different departments, right? To really figure out what is this going to look like? As an example, what is this going to look like in a community center? How do we make sure that we are supporting that family through this process? And so that'll be part of developing our work plan. We've identified that, yes, we will need to do some level of training with staff, you know, as you mentioned, it could be, you know, someone at the counter who they don't need to know everything, but how do we give them just enough information so that if they see a family, maybe a mom with a young child who has been hanging out at the community center for, you know, 2 to 3 days, you know, how can they help support that family to access services? And so, yes, that'll be part of our work plan in developing that with the timeline and figuring out what are some of those training and capacity building needs. I think I mentioned it in the memo. One thing that we are working on internally within PRNS, and then we'll be expanding to other departments, is we are going to be launching a data system. And so that'll be kind of our first process to help, again, help families navigate services so they don't have to fill out, an intake form, as an example. That if they complete that intake at a community center, then that same intake form can then just be shared with one of our community partners so that the family doesn't have to keep completing an intake form. And so that's just one piece that we've already discussed on ensuring that our services are integrated across the board.
So much paperwork.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mendoza, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you. We raised our hand at the same time, but it was a similar question. I just wanted to, I saw that you have 2 locations, like in general. You said you're launching in June. And so I was wondering if you had an exact location, like a community center, library, or school. And I wanted to know how that was going to look like. If you were going to have a staff member there, like an office space, a corner, or if you were going to train everybody in the building, just thinking about the larger picture of how it's going to be implemented once it's ready.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so we do have our community-based partners in those areas. So we have, for example, family resource centers that are funded by First Five, that are operated by our community-based partners. We have community centers, we have libraries. And so we've already been informally talking about, as we prepare to launch, we'll need to have more of those detailed conversations, right? What is that, that youth experience if they come into a Hillview Library or they come into the Mayfair Community Center? So as part of our work plan, we'll be fleshing that out more. And then also working with our partners, because again, we want to make sure that we're facilitating access to services, not only within those that are available within the community center or library, but those that are available through the county or our community-based organizations. So that's the work that we'll be doing in the next few months around that.
Commissioner Pradeep Kumar.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. So this is just out of curiosity. I know a huge part of the Children and Youth Services Master Plan is, I guess, developing safe communities for youth. And I think recently, our nation has been, I guess, having a lot of discussion around, immigration, Department of Education, and there's been a lot of uncertainty when it comes to, I guess, youth and their future regarding that. I know it's a discussion that's come up in my school as well. So I was just wondering what initiatives this program, I don't know if I missed it in the presentation, I don't have the slides. What initiatives the Children and Youth Services Master Plan has to, I guess, ensure, I don't know, a healthy discussion regarding these issues?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something that has more recently been even more important, right? And so, as I mentioned, even as we've developed some of these tools, now that we're actually going to go into implementation, we'll have to probably step back a little bit and really understand, okay, families might not be as willing to share certain information, right? For fear that, well, if I tell you this, is this somehow going to impact my immigration status? Or why are you asking me, if where I live or who I live with, right? I mean, there could be so many questions that you can ask a family that might just create some uneasiness considering the climate currently. So what has been really important for us is making sure that this is grounded in community. And so having families and young people at the table, as well as our community-based organizations who serve families who are kind of in this heightened fear mode, right? To make sure that we are being empathetic and being just considerate of how we are engaging with them, and understanding that because of our current climate, families might just be a little bit more apprehensive about accessing services. And so those will definitely be ongoing conversation. And it's something that, again, by having families and young people at the table will really help us understand that, and having them help us promote and inform their peers and their community members so that hopefully that kind of brings down some uneasiness or some fear that they may have in accessing services. Mhm.
Commissioner Liu.
So a really important topic or a topic that worries a lot of folks in Eastside especially is around their immigration status. My question to you is, how will the plan continue to engage undocumented community in light of, the fear and the uncertainty that the community is facing?
So as far as our services, we won't be asking, on their status. It's also just a city policy, right? I mean, we've have been training staff, for example, in the community centers about some of the fears that families and young people may be having given the current climate. So we are already training staff around that. So as far as city services, and I would say for the vast majority of community-based services, their immigration status is not significant. I think where there might be a challenge on some things might be more like county services, maybe like health services that may require some kind of documentation. So that's the only area where I see that some families may have, some challenges in accessing certain services that might be federally funded or might be funded by state funds. But as far as city services available through our community-based partners, immigration status will not be questioned or will be an issue in accessing services.
I saw Commissioner Banks, and as a reminder, folks, it is a school night. Just throwing that out there.
Question is going towards operations.
Commissioner Banks, can you speak into that?
Sorry. Yes. My question is targeted more toward operations, implementation, looking at how are we tracking like all of our clients and our families? How are we keeping track of our data and providing this system of continuous care? Similar to like previous work that I've done within like homeless shelters as a case manager, we use a HMIS system that allows us to track all of their information across multiple systems. Does Santa Clara use a similar system as well? And is there an opportunity for us to use a similar system when it comes to keeping track of the services that we're providing to our families? So where it's not like we're using paper all the time, but we're being within the age of technology,
right,
and tracking all of our information.
Yes. So PRNS, so Parks, Recreation, Neighborhood Services, is actually going to be rolling out Hasler data system. It's an online data system that will be implemented across our Parks, Recreation, Neighborhood Services funded programs, as well as our internal programs. And so as part of this work, we're going to be aligning with that data system and have it be available to our community-based partners. And so as I was mentioning earlier, that'll be, the benefit of that will be if, as an example, we have our city staff, youth intervention services accessing that data system, they then will be able to refer a family to one of our community-based organizations, right? And so they won't have to ask the same questions, 5 different times. That information will already be in the system, and then we'll be able to track what kinds of services are being offered. What's the progress? How are they doing in those services? Is there we're calling kind of a care plan review, right? Maybe every 6 months, kind of determining on the need of that family to see, how are they doing? Do they need additional services, or does it look like they received what was sufficient and they're ready, right, to leave the program? And so that'll be part of the process. And then we'll be integrating that with our evaluation plan as well, to be able to report out not only on demographics, but what are the services that are being used, and then what are the outcomes. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's been an insightful conversation and enlightening process. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your continued work on this, and for
Thank
coming
you.
back to us over the years.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We will now move to a vote of the Youth Commission to approve the update. Do I have, or sorry, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the vote passes unanimously.
And for our Library and Education Commission, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve and accept the report. We have a motion from Commissioner Avistella.
10 seconds.
We have a second from
Doza.
Mendoza. I'm so sorry. I'm looking right at it too. Commissioner Mendoza, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, all abstaining, motion passes. Thanks, y'all. We'll move on to our next item. Thank you so much to our council members who are here still with us. We'll turn it over to you all to give us a quick update. And I believe we will start with the Office of Councilmember Campos. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Since this is my first time joining you all, my update will just be a little bit about me to introduce myself to this new role. So my name is Pamela Campos, newly elected District 2 council member representing South San Jose. I was born and raised in this city. My family immigrated from Mexico in the late 80s, early 90s. I am one of my parents' 4 daughters. I'm the eldest of my siblings. And I'm very proud to have grown up in downtown East San Jose and South San Jose for most of my upbringing. But I also went to schools in Mountain View and Los Altos. So I have a very broad and deep understanding of our different educational systems and opportunities in the Silicon Valley, which is why I chose to study child development at San Jose State. I worked as a preschool teacher early on in my career and then shifted to policy and advocacy because I witnessed a system that was very challenging for our young children, their parents, and our workforce. And so for the past decade, I have been working in the space of childcare facilities, affordable housing development, public transit development and policy. And now on City Council, I am committed to working on 3 key pillars, which are community infrastructure, economic development, and public safety. And so as liaison to the Youth Commission, I'm very proud to have been at your annual budget summit earlier this year to better understand what priorities are top of mind for the youth of our city, and definitely saw some alignment in the work that I'm already doing and engaged in with the work that you are all interested in. So I look forward to supporting our community over the next 4 years and over the next 2 years in this role as liaison to the Youth Commission. So thank you all.
Councilmember.
Thank you so much. I am Councilmember Rosemary Kamei, and I represent the west side of San Jose. And I see some of you, I know, but there's a lot of you that are new. I was formerly the council liaison to the Youth Commission, and I guess I didn't realize how many had turned over. I know that some of you are seniors and you're going to be turning over again, but I'm delighted that my colleague, Councilmember Campos, has joined you and will be working closely with you. I am now the representative liaison here to the Library and Education Committee. And it's very exciting for me because I do come from education, having spent 7 years on the County Board of Education. So today I wanted to share some information about last night. Some of you may have known that the City Council adopted the mayor's budget message, with many, 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 many additions, subtractions, and it was, we started out at 4 o'clock and we ended nearly at 10 o'clock. So obviously there was a lot of community input as well as conversations and discussions among the council. We did have about 200 plus kind of public comment, so it did take a little while. And we had 6 separate memos from different iterations of what council members wanted to emphasize. At least 6 really extensive letters. One of the letters was signed by 49 organizations. But I want to let you know that this is just the very first step in our budget process. Our budget process actually starts in October. And in that process, you know, we start moving things forward. But once the mayor's budget message is released, then it sort of begins the timeframe in which we start looking at what have been our priorities, what are some of the things that need to happen, what is the economic outlook. The city manager puts out a 5-year, and the budget office puts a 5-year forecast out, and we look at money coming in, money going out. What do our priorities line up with the dollars that the limited dollars that we have? Because this year what we're experiencing is that there is less revenue, and therefore we do have a deficit. So in order to close that deficit, as of December, the city manager asked all of the departments to suspend hiring and to see what are the areas that you could find savings. Not everybody will be cut equally across the board. And I know that I'm sure the budget session that the Youth Commission had, you're sending your information to us, as well as the Library and Education Commission sent their letter to the mayor and city council in terms of talking about what your priorities are and what you feel is important to maintain in the city's budget. So we gather all of that information together. We have continuous workshops that are going to be coming up, and I hope you stay tuned because it is critically important to how we're going to fund the work that we're going to do next year. And so stay tuned. It's going to be very exciting. The areas of most discussion was something that's called responsibility to shelter, which is a future policy on enforcement of accepting housing for the unhoused. And there were multiple comments as to whether it's a good idea, whether it's a bad idea, whether we shouldn't even consider it. So we're going to continue those discussions. There's another one that's called pay for performance for council members, appointees, and senior staff. That would require a change in the city's charter. The city is governed by a charter, and we would have to go to a vote of the people in order to change the charter. So that's pretty significant. Other items that came up is increasing support up to $500,000 for protecting our immigrant community. There's also a housing measure. It's called Measure E, and we have a formula of what we would spend dollars, public dollars for, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's interim housing, whether it's prevention of falling into housing. And so that formula was discussed somewhat, not as extensively as some of the other issues, but it's something that we will need to decide upon. And the other thing that has come up is having a joint county and city meeting to work closer together on the challenges on the plan to end homelessness and really creating more affordable housing. As many of you know, it's really, really expensive to live here in this area. And, you know, it's not an issue that we're going to solve alone. It is a regional issue. It is a statewide issue, but regionally we can do more together than apart. So the city manager was directed to set up some time for us to work together. And then there were other opportunities for revenue generation. And the mayor's budget message was 40 pages long. So when you have a moment and want to look into it, it's very interesting. It really, really talks about a lot of the priorities, and the priorities came from previous council sessions in terms of what we see as important. There's a lot more in it, and we still have to discuss it. So stay tuned. It's going to be exciting this year, as Jill can tell you. She was there.
Thank you, council member. Thank you, council members, for your past, continued, and future support of the commission. We truly appreciate your time and effort in supporting us. With that, we will move to item 7, chair announcements, and I will start for the Youth Commission. I'll try to make it quick. District 4 YAC put up mental health awareness posters at District 4 schools. We have an upcoming Eco Swap between District 7 and 4 at Berryessa Branch on April 26th. District 3 hosted a neighborhood cleanup that included 50 people, and they will have another one in partnership with Beautify SJ in the next month. Please continue promoting Youth Commission applications. We have 8 seats that are about to be turned over, and so we'd love to get those seats filled up. Recruitment ends March 31st, so please, if you can do one final push, that would be great. Keep your calendars open on April 19th for Adopt a Drain event at Rainbow Park in partnership with District 1. Our annual reports, that includes our work plan, your YACs, those are due by next Tuesday if you can get them in. If you are interested in presenting to NSC a sort of wrap up of what the commission accomplished this year, that will be on May 8th. Please let me know via text or email. We have a tree planting in coordination with PRNS and the mayor's fund on May 10th. Our District 10 has been in talks with Congressman Panetta to host a meeting. District 1 is going to host a civic engagement event on May 24th from 1:30 to 4 p.m. And finally, the Gender-Based Violence Ad Hoc has been working on a leadership luncheon that will take place next year. Thank you. That's all for the Youth Commission.
All right. And for the Library and Education Commission, I just want to give a phenomenal shout out to you all. Great questions, great engagement. So let's give it up for our youth commissioners and of course for our commissioners. As our council members mentioned, that they have some tough decisions ahead of them. And so I want to highlight for you all, our vice chair wrote a SJ Spotlight opinion article. Check it out. It does a phenomenal job at breaking down the ROI and benefits that our library system has for our city. And we've talked about this over and over again. Our library system is not just books. It is resources, it's safety, it is connection to each other and to the community. So share it, read it. It does a really good job. Shout out to our vice chair who's listening right now. Hopefully she's putting kiddo to bed. But just wanted to shout her out and give our commission a resource that we can share out with others to highlight the importance of our libraries. All right, I'll turn it over to Jill for the library director's report.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it really quick. Just note that, of course, we have a lot of programs going on. You can check them all out on our website. This weekend, we do have a couple of items. We are honoring the life of Cesar Chavez at our Village Square Branch Library on Friday, this Friday, March 21st, from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. And that you can find more information at sjpl.org/Cesar Chavez. We also on March 22nd, which is Saturday from 1 to 2:30 at King Library, we're having an event with our partnership with the Georgian Heritage Foundation. They have a series called Georgia on My Mind, the country, not the state, which I always love. And so for more information on that is also on our website. Of course, this month, we're also offering up until April 15th and beyond, free tax help throughout our library. So spread the word on that. And lastly, I did want to note that while we were present at the budget hearings, there was a lot of in-person comment about more of the policy items in the budget message. But I did have plenty of time to scroll through all the online or the submitted letters to council. And there were 12 letters about libraries. And they were from people I don't even know. So I was really excited to read those. Those are part of the public record, and I think expressed a lot of the same things that our vice chair expressed in her op-ed. So thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Librarian Bourne. We will move to item 9, adjournment. On the Youth Commission side, we are adjourned at 8:55 p.m.
And for Library and Education Commission, 8:50.